The forest didn't make that kind of sound. Jonah Matthews paused mid-step, one hand resting on the worn strap of his leather satchel, the other instinctively reaching for the old walking stick that had seen more trails than most men ever would. The fog had settled early that morning, thick, gray, silent. Pines stretched tall on either side of the trail, their needles dusted with frost. A creek murmured faintly nearby, but everything else was still. Until that sound again. A whimper. High-pitched. Weak. Not a fox. Not a bird. And definitely not the wind. Jonah glanced down at Daisy, his 13-year-old Labrador, whose ears had perked and nose twitched. She let out a low whine, nudged his boot once, then started veering off the trail into the underbrush without waiting. "Easy now," Jonah muttered, his voice rough from age and pine smoke. "Let's see what this is." They moved slowly, Jonah's legs stiff from the cold, Daisy's old joints creaking with every step. But the sound came again. Closer now. A fallen birch. A thicket of thorny bramble. A patch of flattened earth where something had clearly bedded down. And then, he saw it. Huddled in the crook of a log, barely more than a ball of fur and ribs, lay a bear cub. It wasn't moving, just trembling. Its fur was matted with leaves and dirt. One paw twisted awkwardly under its body. Flies buzzed near a small open wound along its flank. But what stopped Jonah cold wasn't the injury or the size. It was the eyes. Wide. Dark. Terrified. And still, full of a strange, impossible trust. Daisy froze. Then slowly, cautiously, she approached, not barking, not growling, just sniffing gently. The cub didn't flinch. Jonah knelt down beside it. "Where's your mother, little one?" he whispered. The forest gave no answer. He looked around. No blood trail. No prints. No signs of another bear. He'd seen this before, abandonment, usually after the mother is injured or killed. The cub was maybe 5 months old. Alone out here? It wouldn't last another night. He could call fish and wildlife, sure. Wait hours. Let them take it somewhere. Some cage. A cold report. A file. Or... Jonah slowly took off his canvas jacket and wrapped it around the cub. It gave a soft, exhausted grunt, not of fear, but of surrender. "You don't belong out here alone," Jonah muttered. "But then again, neither do I." He scooped the cub into his arms. Daisy trotted ahead, back toward the cabin. And in the middle of that quiet wilderness, a man, a dog, and a forgotten cub disappeared into the fog, none of them knowing just how much this moment would change their lives forever. Jonah's cabin sat like an old photograph, faded, quiet, and full of things left untouched. The wind whispered through the chimes on the porch as he pushed open the door with his shoulder, the bundle in his arms barely stirring. He moved gently, setting the cub down on an old flannel blanket near the fireplace. The heat from the stove radiated into the room, and the pine wood crackled like it was happy to help. The cub curled up immediately, not out of comfort, but exhaustion. Its breathing was shallow. One ear twitched, then stilled. Daisy patted in behind him, sniffing the floor with a mother's worry. Her paws clicked across the hardwood. She approached slowly, not like a guard dog but like something older, wiser. She'd seen pups before. Lost things. Broken things. She stopped inches from the cub, lowered her head, and sniffed once. The cub twitched but didn't lift its head. And then, Daisy licked its cheek. Jonah blinked. "Well, I'll be," he muttered. Daisy circled once, lay down next to the cub, and let out a soft exhale. Her body curved around the little creature like a blanket made of fur and heart. The cub didn't resist. It just breathed slower, then fell asleep with its head resting against her belly. Jonah stood frozen by the kitchen table, holding a mug of untouched coffee. His hands trembled slightly. Not from fear. From memory. He remembered when his wife Marion had once done the same, wrapped herself around their fevered son after a long winter hike gone wrong. Just warmth. No words. He stared at Daisy and the cub for a long time. And then he whispered to the quiet room, "Guess you're a mom again." The next morning brought a change in the air. Jonah woke before dawn, as always. He poured oats into Daisy's bowl, whistled once, then turned to check on the cub. Only, it wasn't on the blanket anymore. He found it on the porch, wobbling on unsure paws, bumping into flower pots. Right behind it? Daisy. She nudged it away from the edge. It followed her like a shadow. The cub stumbled, fell, then got up and tried again, copying her step for step. Jonah stood there in his bathrobe, watching like someone seeing light after a long tunnel. "This can't be real," he whispered. But it was. Over the next week, the transformation stunned him. The cub, who Jonah started calling Birch after the tree where he'd found him, mimicked Daisy in every way. She would sniff at the creek. Birch would wade in, awkward but determined. She barked at the wind. Birch grunted and turned in the same direction. She stretched on the porch before naps. He did too, limbs flailing in slow motion. It was like watching a pup raised in the wrong skin. They played together, slow games at first. Birch swatted at her tail, then tried to chase a stick, though he mostly tripped over his own feet. Daisy, older and patient, never snapped. She guided him with licks, low rumbles, and soft body language. Jonah began documenting it, little notes on paper scraps left on the table. Day 3, he copies her bark. Day 6, ate from her bowl. She let him. Day 9, follows her everywhere. And beneath all those notes, always scribbled after sundown, he thinks she's his mother. That night, as thunder rolled distantly through the hills, Jonah sat by the fire, staring at the two of them curled together on the rug. A bear cub. A tired old dog. And the space between them that once was grief, now filled with something unnamed but healing. He took a sip of Marion's favorite chamomile tea, looked at the flickering flame, and whispered into the hush of the cabin. "You were right, Ruth. Love does come back, sometimes in the strangest shapes." Spring came early that year. The snow melted fast, revealing green beneath the cabin like someone had peeled back a layer of silence. Dandelions dotted the yard. The creek ran louder, faster. And Birch was growing. Fast. By the time the cherry blossoms bloomed near the edge of the property, he was nearly the size of a large dog. His legs were stronger, muscles more defined, paws heavier. He didn't waddle anymore, he walked with purpose, though still unsure of his strength. Daisy noticed the change first. She moved slower now. Let him chase rabbits she would have barked at last year. And sometimes when he nudged her too hard while playing, she would step away quietly, and Birch would sit down, head low, like a child realizing it had outgrown the game. Jonah watched it all from the porch, a journal in his lap, the same old flannel jacket on his shoulders. He'd never been one for writing, but something about Birch made him want to remember every detail. Every change. And it wasn't just size. Birch began sniffing higher up trees. Climbing. Pawing at logs and digging small holes. One morning, he stood at the tree line, frozen, nose lifted to the wind. It was instinct. The call of the wild. Jonah set down his cup and watched the cub, a weight settling in his chest. "He's starting to remember what he is," he whispered. That same week, the call came. It was Ranger Dana, a calm voice with sharp edges. Jonah had met her years ago when he reported poachers near the lake. Now she worked at the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center over the ridge. "We've reviewed the footage from the remote cams," she said. "Your bear's doing well. Healthy. Too healthy, actually. He's reaching the age where human contact becomes dangerous, for you and for him." Jonah stared at the floorboards beneath his boots. "He's not dangerous." "Not yet," she said gently. "But it's time to start preparing him for release." "Release," he repeated, as if the word was in a language he barely knew. "We'll start slowly. Less human interaction. Change his feeding habits. Build up his instincts. He's already got a head start. Your dog taught him boundaries better than most of our training programs." Jonah tried to laugh, but it caught in his throat. "He thinks she's his mother." Dana was quiet for a moment. "Then it's going to be hard. For all three of you." The next morning, Jonah made changes. He started feeding Birch from behind a barrier. No talking. No eye contact. Birch paced at first, confused. Hurt. Daisy stopped eating for a day. Jonah had to look away when the cub pressed his nose against the fence and made a low moaning sound. Not angry, just lost. The enclosure expanded into the woods. Jonah added logs, stacked rocks, dragged in deer bones and fur for scent exposure. Birch explored it all, but each night, He still returned to the cabin fence and waited for Daisy to lie down beside it. Sometimes she did. Sometimes she just stared, ears low, knowing things her heart didn't want to admit. A week later, Birch climbed his first tree. Jonah watched through binoculars from the window. Birch was clumsy at first, then graceful. He reached the first big branch, sniffed the air, then looked back toward the cabin. For a moment, just one moment, he looked like he was going to climb back down and run home. But he didn't. He turned toward the woods and stared, longer than usual. Jonah closed the journal and sighed. He's almost ready. But inside, something very old and very soft whispered back. But I'm not. The day had come. Jonah knew it the moment he opened the door that morning and found Ranger Dana's truck idling at the gate. The sun was just beginning to break through the clouds, painting the wet grass in soft gold. Birds chirped like nothing was happening. But everything was. Birch stood near the edge of the woods, pawing at a stump, unaware, or maybe just pretending. Daisy sat by the front steps, ears low, watching the road. Dana stepped out of the truck with practiced ease, clipboard in hand and a transport crate already in the bed. Jonah met her at the porch, his voice quieter than usual. "You're early." She offered a small smile. "We thought it'd be easier that way." He didn't respond. Inside the house, he had already packed a small bag of cloth that had Birch's scent, folded an old flannel square from the blanket the cub once slept on. He didn't know if it mattered. He just couldn't send him off with nothing. When Birch saw the truck, he froze. He didn't run. He didn't growl. He just looked at Daisy. She let out a small, unsure bark. Birch responded with a soft huff, not quite a sound of fear. More like a goodbye caught in the chest. Jonah opened the enclosure gate, his hand trembling. Birch came to him willingly. That hurt more than if he'd resisted. Dana stepped forward with the tranquilizer. Just enough to keep him calm for the trip. Jonah shook his head. "Let me." He crouched beside Birch, brushing his hand over the thick fur one last time. "You're ready," he whispered. "I just wish I wasn't." Birch nuzzled his arm, the same spot he used to nudge as a cub when he wanted food. Then Jonah nodded to Dana. The dart went in clean. Within seconds, Birch lay on his side, eyes blinking slowly, not afraid, just drowsy. Dana and her assistant lifted him gently into the crate. Daisy followed them halfway down the trail, tail stiff, legs uncertain. She stopped as the door closed. Then she sat, watching, waiting. The truck pulled away, gravel crunching, engine fading into the wind. That night, the cabin didn't feel empty. It felt hollow. Jonah placed the flannel blanket back beside the fire. Daisy sniffed it once, then lay down without a sound. She didn't whine. Didn't bark. She just curled into the space where Birch had once been and stayed there until dawn. Jonah sat by the window with the lamp on, pen in hand, staring at the journal page. He wrote one line. "I taught him to be wild, but forgot to teach myself how to let go." He closed the book, blew out the lamp, and listened to the silence echo like a goodbye that didn't want to end. The house didn't creak the same anymore. For weeks after Birch was taken to the sanctuary, Walter's cabin echoed differently, heavier, as if the walls had learned what absence felt like. The rug near the fire remained untouched. The paw prints on the back porch faded under spring rain. Only the old bowl by the stump remained, now dry and dusted with pine needles. Daisy changed too. She walked slower, ate less. She still sniffed the air before lying down each night, and she still sat at the gate some mornings, not whining, not moving, just waiting. Jonah didn't talk much anymore. Not to the radio. Not to the wind. Not even to himself. He just kept busy, chopping wood, planting tomatoes, fixing fence posts that hadn't needed repair in years. Things Marion would have called fidgeting with grief. Evenings were the worst. He'd sit on the porch with Daisy curled near his boots, staring toward the woods, toward nothing. The flannel blanket Birch used to sleep on was folded neatly inside now, but Jonah never tucked it away. He just couldn't. The wildlife sanctuary sent a letter 2 weeks later. "All 3 cubs are healthy. Milo, Fern, and Ash have adapted well to natural foraging. They will be released gradually into a monitored forest area once deemed fully independent." Jonah read it once. Then he placed it in the drawer with Marion's letters and never opened it again. It was near the start of summer when something changed. Jonah was out by the creek one morning, throwing scraps of old cabbage into the compost pile, when he noticed movement near the tree line. Not rustling. Not wind. Stillness. Daisy stopped mid-step, ears perked. Jonah turned slowly, expecting deer. Instead he saw nothing. But when he walked to the edge of the trees, he froze. Tracks. Not human. Not canine. Bear. Small. Cub-sized. He knelt down, tracing the pad impressions with 2 fingers. Fresh. Just hours old. His chest tightened. "Birch," he whispered. He looked around. No sound. No movement. Still, the next morning, he left out a bowl of water and a few overripe apples on the old feeding stump, half feeling foolish, half feeling desperate. By sunrise, the apples were gone. The bowl was knocked over. And beside it, something else. A smooth gray stone placed neatly on top of the stump, almost as if someone or something had left a token behind. Jonah stood there for a long time. Daisy sat beside him, tail still, nose twitching. From the trees, nothing stirred. But somehow, it didn't feel empty anymore. That night, Jonah lit the fireplace again for the first time in weeks. He poured a mug of Marion's favorite tea and sat in the rocking chair with Daisy curled at his feet. Outside, the wind moved differently, not like a warning, but like a whisper. He reached for his journal. Wrote only one line. Some bonds are never truly broken. They just go silent for a while. Then he put down the pen, stared at the glowing coals and smiled, not because he knew Birch was coming, but because he believed it was possible. And in the heart of the wilderness, belief is often the first step to reunion. The sky broke without warning. A violent wind whipped across the ridgeline as storm clouds gathered like a war council over the cascade trees. By noon, the first raindrops fell. By sunset, they were a deluge. Jonah moved fast. He secured the chicken coop, pulled the tarp over his log pile, and checked the generator, grumbling at the stubborn pull cord. Daisy followed his every step, tense. Storms weren't unusual this time of year. But this one felt different, urgent, like it carried something more than just weather. By nightfall, power flickered out. Jonah lit the lantern. He was halfway to the front door when Daisy growled, low, sharp, protective. Jonah froze. There, at the base of the porch stairs, were 2 figures. Men. Hats low. Flashlights off. One of them holding what looked like a crowbar. Jonah's stomach dropped. They came up the steps without a word. "Evening," one said. Southern drawl, too casual for a man in a ski mask. "Sorry to trouble you." "Car trouble." Jonah didn't move. "The road ends 2 miles down." "Yeah, we noticed," the man said. His partner was already eyeing the windows. "Mind if we come in?" Jonah's grip tightened around the lantern handle. Daisy barked once, loud, fierce, but the man stepped forward fast and kicked her hard. She yelped and collapsed against the door. "You didn't have to." Jonah started, but the crowbar swung up in warning. "Shut it, old man." They pushed inside. Daisy crawled after them, growling weakly. Jonah raised his hands. "Take what you want." "Oh, we will." They tore through the shelves. The drawers. One pocketed his late wife's locket without a second glance. The other kicked over the small stack of books by the fire. One of them turned toward Jonah. "Where's your safe?" "I don't have one." The crowbar man laughed. "Everyone has a safe. Especially way out here." That's when the lights flickered. But it wasn't the generator. It was something outside, a shadow moving past the window. Then, another. Daisy stood suddenly, nose high, hackles raised. But she wasn't growling now. She was waiting. A growl rose behind the cabin, deep and low, like thunder with teeth. The intruders froze. "What the?" Before they could reach the door, a crash shattered the window. A massive black shape hurled itself halfway through the frame, snarling. A bear. The man with the crowbar screamed and swung. The bear recoiled, then charged, smashing through the remaining glass like paper. Jonah backed away, shielding Daisy. The second intruder fumbled for the front door, only to find another bear standing on the porch. A third blocked the back hall. The intruders were trapped. One dove through the window. The other made a run for the kitchen, but the third bear caught him, slamming its massive paw into the counter beside his head. Jonah stood speechless. The largest of the three turned toward him, and lowered its head gently. Those eyes. That scar above the left brow. That slight tilt of the snout, just like Birch. Jonah whispered. The bear let out a soft, hoarse chuff. Daisy whimpered, then bounded forward and pressed her head against Birch's side. He didn't flinch. He leaned into her. The other two bears, smaller, one with a patch of white on her chest, backed off once the men fled into the storm, scrambling into the trees like hunted animals. Birch stayed. Jonah stepped closer, almost afraid it would break the spell. You came back, he breathed. Birch stood still. Silent. Powerful. Not tame. But remembering. Jonah extended a trembling hand. Birch sniffed it once. Then gently pressed his nose into Jonah's palm, the same gesture from all those months ago. Jonah wept. Openly. Not from fear. From grief that had nowhere left to go. And from love he thought would never return. By dawn, the storm had passed. The porch was wrecked. The window shattered. But the danger was gone. Sheriff Harlan came up the road after hearing the gunshots and found Jonah sitting on the porch, holding a mug of cold tea, Daisy asleep at his feet. He listened to the whole story, then blinked once. So, 3 bears broke in. Scared off 2 armed burglars. One of them was your old cub. The one raised by your dog. Jonah just nodded. The sheriff looked at the paw prints around the cabin, the claw marks in the door. Strangest break-in I've ever seen, he muttered. Jonah chuckled. I'd call it a rescue. Epilogue. They never came close again, the bears. But every now and then, Jonah would wake up and find the bird feeder knocked over. Or a new stone by the fire pit. Or paw prints at the creek bed. Once he left out a scarf, the one Birch used to nuzzle when he was just a cub. By morning, it was gone. But in its place was a fish. Fresh. Still warm. Jonah placed it in the pan, cooked it with rosemary, and smiled to himself. Family doesn't always wear the shape we expect. Sometimes, it has claws and fur. And remembers the hand that once fed it when the world forgot.